Good morning. So this morning we're going to be doing English Language Paper B, Paper 1, Edexcel, International IGCSE, June 2018, R. So I'll read you out text 1 and then I'll read you out text 2. And then I'm going to go straight to the problematic questions, which are the questions where you ask to, analyse the text basically. And I'm going to try and talk to you about that so that you have some idea. So I strongly suggest that you write some notes because this is where a lot of people fall down on this paper. So let's start. Adventure activities in New Zealand, adapted from an article by Victoria Philpott. In this passage, the writer describes some adventurous activities she's taken part in. I'm actually going to talk about this as I go through it, just trying to unpick how this writer is using language, which is basically what the difficult questions are asking you to do. So we start with a quote, which is actually quite impressive. You'll feel the wall against your face and pressing up on your back. Just ease yourself down between the gap and watch out for any creatures that might jump in your face. That's it, slowly, slowly. So it starts with a quote, an instruction actually to somebody. It's quite full of suspense. What is she doing? Isn't this exciting? And it's dialogue, so it feels quite colloquial, doesn't it? And informal. Colloquial means as we speak. So quite a nice start actually. That was my guide speaking. I was attempting to do as instructed and abseil down a tight gap going underground in Waitomo, New Zealand. This involved descending a steep slope by using a rope passed around my body and fixed at a higher point. The harness was pulling tight around my thighs and my left hand was burning from gripping the rope too hard. With my right hand I gripped the rope controller more out of the desperation to hold on to something still and sturdy rather than any actual safety aspect. So, this is actually very descriptive of a process, isn't it? This involved descending a steep slope using a rope passed around my body. So this is actually transactional writing. At this point, this paragraph is just telling us, zooming in on what she's actually doing. This was the Black Abyss tour with the Black Rafting Company, but I hadn't quite processed exactly what it involved before I signed up. Nice short paragraph telling us exactly what this is. Notice black twice, which makes us think this might be unusually hard. We were fitted for shoes, thick wetsuits, socks, helmets and harnesses. Nice list there. So brighter, younger and more enthusiastic than ever be again. I was ready for action again. So rule of 3. So yeah, she's using all aspects that I've told you to write a good creative piece. Short and long sentences, different types of punctuation. Yes, we've got the lists there. Rule of 3, and nice short paragraphs as well. Ready for the 35-metre abseil into the ground and under it. Okay, so there we are, some facts there. Our guides Nix and Flash were very reassuring and seemed fairly confident I'd be able to do it. Between them they had loads of experience and I felt safe in their hands, so very colloquial, loads. Good enough odds for me. So it's from a point of view, interesting, first person, personal, feels like we might be there, like she's trying to recommend us to do it. We did a little practice with the abseil ropes on the grassy verge before we went for the real thing. When it got to stepping off the platform into a 40-metre drop, doing it on the slight incline we'd been practicing on seemed very different. It seemed to take an age to work my way down. The walls were slippery. It was hard to get any firm grip, and I was terrified of creatures jumping out at me, as Nix had warned. When it got to stepping off the platform into a 40-metre drop, doing it on the slight incline we'd been practicing on seemed very different, full stop. It seemed to take an age to work my way down, the walls were slippery, it was hard to get any firm grip, and I was terrified of creatures jumping out of me. So there you are, that's the list, isn't it, of why it was difficult. Am I nearly there yet? I shouted into the abyss. So you can see that some dialogue in there, which I've told you in your creative writing recipe is really important to make it sound interesting. Yeah, so and she's using this all the way through. I shouted into the abyss as the rope burn was starting to get too much for me. Foolishly timed as usual, one more release of the rope and I'd finished. Of course, the moment it's over, I decided it hadn't taken long enough and just wanted to go back and do it again. After a little rest on the rocks, waiting for the rest of my drink, we carried on to the Flying Fox. So this is basically a travel log. I'm going to just go and have a little look here and see what this actually is, because that's helpful too. So you'll be able to see what it is. It should be able to tell you. Text 1, gapyear.com, cave, abseiling and blackwater rafting in New Zealand. So sometimes it's helpful really quickly to go and see who's writing this, why they're writing it. Cool. So this is some sort of teenagers having a gap year telling us what a great time she had. And actually it's written in the first person, it's relatively informal. And it's a sort of, she's not a professional writer, and it's quite good at writing though. Okay, so let's just carry on. The Flying Fox is a zip line. In this case, it's underground, ended in a thwack against the cave wall. That's what it sounded like from the people in front of you, so that's onomatopoeia. When I actually did it, I realised there was a stopper on the zip line preventing you from bashing into anything but leaving you spinning in the air if you go at it full force like I did. Still, I screamed and squealed to scare those yet to do it. Yeah, so there we are, SS, alliteration. After trauma of this, we had a little break with some hot chocolate and a snack to give us the energy to complete the next stage. We sat drinking on the edge of a 30-metre drop into water while Nixon Flash packed up the zip line stuff. I was terrified they're going to make us jump off into the water. So it's an underground zip line. The leap of faith, they did. We had to hold an inflatable ring under our bottoms and jump into the freezing water. Okay, that's a nice short sentence there. I was terrified they were going to make us jump into the water. So yeah, so she's got a nice sort of connectives here, hasn't she? Hooking us through this. We had to hold an inflatable ring under our bottoms and jump into the freezing water. One of the girls in my group cried. She really didn't want to do it. I toughened up and went for it. It was freezing cold. Personally, I think this sounds hideous. Flanking the side of the cave was a rope we could pull ourselves along, admiring the glow worms as we went. I wouldn't mind if I knew someone really well, but some stranger's telling me to do those things. But anyway, we got to a certain point and Flash made us connect our feet under the arms of the person in front. We glided along the water in a chain. After we cruised around for a bit in the inflatable rings, we got up and started to walk around in the underground wilderness. We dived down slides, had to push ourselves through narrow passages, and navigate the rocky terrain in the dark with just our head torches to light the way. So she's gone down into these caves, hasn't she? We had another break for some orange juice and a block of chocolate before the final stretch. The final challenge was to climb out of 2 waterfalls freestyle. The water was pummeling down and you had to go around it and up, carefully placing your feet as you went. So this is an informational piece about this particular gap year experience. The water was bubbling down and you had to go around and up and carefully placing your feet as you went. Flash was on hand to give some climbing tips, but at this point, 4 hours after we started, my legs were ridiculously tired. They were weak and trying to push myself up over the brow of the waterfall. I fear it would finish me off. So very personal. This is a personal sort of diary piece, isn't it? Like everyone before, I made it out. I felt weird to be in daylight again. We had a quick photograph under the waterfall outdoors, and it was finally time to take the wet shoes and shoes off. After a much-needed hot shower, we met again in the cafe to see our photos with some hot soup and bread, and reminisced about our awesome day at Blackwater rafting in New Zealand. Definitely an experience to remember. So that's sort of a bit of an extreme sport, isn't it? It's quite terrifying, and she's talking through it. Now, text 2, I haven't read this, I'm just making the assumption from the title. The Whirlpool Rapids, adapted from a short story by Margaret Atwood. It's a short story. It's going to be a creative piece. That one up there is an informational piece. It's giving you information. It's using, deforestee to a certain extent. And it's just outlining the key things, really, and using informational language, isn't it? This one is going to be very different because it's by Margaret Atwood, who's a great author, by the way. If you don't know that, you can go down the bottom, and I think it might give you some hint The Whirlpool Rapids and Bluebeard's Egg and Other Stories. So it's a real book. It's a real book by one of my favourite writers. So let's have a look. It's terrifying. Also, look at the bit at the top. Describes a terrifying experience. What's the bit at the top of this one? Adventurous activities. So yeah, so they're both sort of extreme basic activities. When she was 21, Emma had an extremely narrow escape. It was a freak accident. The fact she was there at all was an accident too. The result of a woman knowing someone. The person she knew was a man about her own age called Bill. He wanted to come on a test run, he said. The travel agency he was working for was developing a new kind of adventure. Look at that. Already can see it's a great writer. Down the Whirlpool Rapids, below Niagara Falls on a big rubber raft. They'd done the run 9 times so far, and it was perfectly safe, but they weren't ready to open to the public until they'd done it more and more tests. It struck him as the kind of thing that might appeal to Emma. Emma said yes at once. Whoa. Really? Doesn't sound very nice. The raft was black and enormous and seemed resting at its moorings, very stable. Emma was given an orange life raft and buckled herself into it. Then they scrambled on board and found seats at the front end. They were among the first to arrive and had to wait for the others. Emma began to feel slightly let down and wondered why she'd come. The raft was too big, too solid. It was like a floating car park. Okay, so that's nice, isn't it? It was too big, too solid. It was like a floating car park. So you've got imagery there, and a list, and semicolons. Yay. Black and almost very stable. Also, the idea is that Emma seems to be wanting something really exciting, and it's too big and ordinary. Once they moved out into the current, the rubber surfaces under her began to ripple in large waves of contraction like a giant throat swallowing, and spray came in upon them. And Emma knew that the rapids, which had looked so decorative, so much like cake icing from a distance, were actually, after all, great imagery, like a giant throat swallowing, and no longer looked like cake icing. There were some dutiful, thrilled noises from other passages, and then some genuine noises, less thrilled. Brilliant. Repetition. There's a lot of talk later about why the 10th run should have failed so badly after the other 9 had gone without a hitch. All she saw was the front of the raft tipping down into a trough deeper than any they'd yet hit, while a foaming wall of water rose above them. The raft should have carved sinuously, sliding up the wave. Instead, it buckled across the middle, the front half snapping towards its back like the beak of a bird closing. Emma and Bill and the other people in the front row shot backwards over the heads of the rest, who were jumbling in a heap at the bottom of the V, now submerging. Ooh, so it folds over, doesn't it, into a V. Something struck her on the side of the head, a boot perhaps, and she was underwater. Later she learnt that the raft had flipped and a man had been trapped underneath it, so it was just as well that she'd been flung clear. But underwater she did not think. Something else made her hold her breath and struggle towards the surface, which she could see above her, white and silver, so her eyes must have been open. Her head rose up, she gasped air and was sucked under. Ooh. The water tumbled and boiled and Emma faltered. She was filled almost to bursting with the energy that came from anger. I refuse to die in such a stupid way, was how she expressed this afterwards. There were rocks and she collided with several and was bruised and scraped, but nothing more hit her head. And after what seemed like an hour, it was really only 10 minutes. The current was less and she found she could keep her head above the water and actually swim. She propelled herself towards the shore and finally dragged herself onto a small rocky beach. Her running shoes were gone. She must have kicked them off, though she couldn't remember doing it, semicolon, or maybe they had been torn off. She wondered how she was going to get over the rocks without shoes. She must have been cut. Her shoes were certainly ripped. There was a huge lump on the side of her forehead, but she didn't notice any of this at the time. She was taken to the hospital and treated for shock and interviewed on television. Her picture was briefly in the paper, a nice short sentence. But the most obvious effect of the accident on Emma was her strong subsequent belief that she was invulnerable. She had been thrown into whirlpool rapids of Niagara Falls, and she had lived, therefore nothing could touch her. She walked in a bubble of charmed air, which at times she imagined could almost see, shimmering around her like mist, like in fact the mist that rose from the falls themselves. It's a good story, isn't it? Did the rest of them die? That's interesting, isn't it? I wonder if the rest of them died. Anyway. So you answer a load of questions here, text one in the extract booklet, blah, blah, blah. Explain how the writer presents her ideas about adventure activities. You should support your answer with close reference to the passage, including brief quotations. This is the question, isn't it, that you're going to have to, how does she present her ideas? Okay, I'm going to ask you to do this. So what do I say? I'm going to look and tell you what I think. How does she present her ideas? I haven't looked at the masking. Okay, so she breaks it up, doesn't she, into activities. She puts the first person. She takes us in a linear blow by blow by blow through the day. She gives us lots of informational language and tries to make it sort of quite objective in some ways. Informational, so if you want to do it, you know what you're doing. Yes, she gives you lists of what she was wearing and rule of three. So brighter, younger, more enthusiastic than I'll ever be. So probably 5 points we want. Um, so she gives us lots of detail as though we're there. So you could quote, "Oh, good enough odds for me." So you've actually got it's colloquial, informal language. You could say that. So I don't know if we're at 5 yet. And then she actually gives you some facts. When we got to stepping off the platform into a 40-metre drop, doing it on the steep incline we've been practicing on seemed very different. So yeah, you've got facts there, and then nice bits of dialogue to bring it to life, basically. And a metaphor. It's not actually burning, is it? The flying fox is a zip line. Yeah, bashing. So yeah, very descriptive. Still, I screamed and squealed to scare those yet to do it. So using sensory description, sounds, thwack, onomatopoeia. Short and long sentences. They did. I was terrified they were going to make us jump off into the water. They did. So that's the connective that has us in suspense. Um, and then we could say how it begins and how it ends. Definitely an experience to remember. Linear, going through blah by blow by blow by blow. So they go. At the very end, they go and have a shower and they look at our photos. Black water rafting in New Zealand, which seems a little bit like an advert, to be honest, as well. Mentioning where it is. You'll feel the wall against your face and pressing up on it. Just ease yourself down between them and watch out for anything that might jump in your face. That's it, slowly. So you've got this first sentence that is really adventurous, isn't it? You seem to be crawling down a sort of abyss, actually, which is, as the picture shows, two walls on either side, and you're sort of squeezing yourself in the middle in the abyss, which is a deep sort of cavern. Just ease yourself down between the gap and watch out for any creatures that might jump in your face. That's it, slowly, slowly. So it's fun, it's active, it's adventurous. Yeah, and it's enthusiastic. The tone is enthusiastic, isn't it? And active. Okay. So that's that one. There's about 5 points there, isn't there? What's the next question? Let's have a look. Text 2. Explain how the writer describes what Emma experiences. You should support your answer with close reference to the text, including brief quotations. So if you look at the first one, what aspects of De Foresti did it use? It didn't use any imagery, did it? It used rule of three, it uses some facts, it used alliteration, and it's obviously a big anecdote of her story. Yeah, so all of that, and some direct address, but it's actually the other guys addressing them, but it's almost like addressing us as well. So De Foresti is helpful. If you don't know what De Foresti is, go and remind yourself. This is going to be using my creative writing recipe. So we want 5 points, which I think will be really easy. I'm not even going to look at it. I'm going to say she uses the most amazing imagery. Um, she uses incredibly descriptive language to get us into there, doesn't she? But I think the imagery is the first thing that I would want to say about it. Where is it? I am going to look at it, obviously, but I'm just saying the imagery is what I really loved. Oh, the water tumbled and boiled, and Emma felt it. She was filled almost to bursting with the energy that came from anger. I refused to die in such. So very strong emotive language. Um, and this text is full of energetic verbs, tumbled and boiled. So she's in a really situation where it's really very the verbs used is very very dangerous situation, very active. Um, her running shoes were gone. She must have kicked them. She couldn't remember doing it. So yeah, so it also very describes her, what's happened to her. Very short sentence from the outside. She was taken to hospital and treated for shock. It's obviously from the third person. That's most important. Someone, the voice of God is looking at her basically as a third person. They're looking at her and saying what's happened. So they've got an overall picture of her. So she walked in a bubble of air. So we could look at how it begins and it ends. So it is beautifully written because the mist that rose from the falls themselves, it's like she's become part of the falls at the end, hasn't it? Because she's actually, and it's an image, it obviously isn't got a mist swimming around her. So when she was 21, Emma had an extremely narrow escape. It was a freak accident. The fact that she was there at all was an accident too, the result of a whim and of knowing somebody. So you've got the whole idea at the beginning, it's accidents and escapes. So it starts with an extremely narrow escape, and then you have that bit at the end that she's now thinks she's touched with magic. So rule of three, black and enormous and resting its neighbours very stable. And there's a whole paragraph on the raft which is very powerful and we can visualise it, we can paint the picture. And we get the feeling she'd been to feel slightly let down, wonder why she'd come. The raft was too big, too solid, it was like a floating car park. So that's ironic as well, because it turns out to be not at all. Once they'd moved out into the current, the rubber surface under her began to ripple in large waves of contraction like a giant throat swallowing, and spray came in upon them. Great image, like a giant throat swallowing. And there's like cake icing from a distance. Really brilliant images. So from a distance, it looks harmless, beautiful, almost magical, like cake icing, and delicious and positive. It becomes like a giant throat swallowing because it's going to swallow them up, which is the opposite. A bit like a horror, that film, that bit. And then I like this repetition. There are some dutiful, thrilled noises from the other passages, and then there's some genuine noises, less thrilled. I like that. That's really, really good. Very simple sentence with repetition. Then it's got a flash forward as well, which is there was a lot of talk later. I talk about flashbacks and flash forwards. So you could see it's going to fail really, really badly. And so, yeah, there's a beautiful flash forward here. There's a lot of talk later about why the 10th round should have failed so badly after the other 10 and 9 had gone without a hitch. Yeah, if you're not sure how to do it, look at my template, basically, that she's just using, the ingredients of the creative writer recipe, that we've covered many times. When I say she's obviously a gifted writer. All she saw was the front of the raft tipping into a trough deeper than they'd yet hit, while a foaming wall of water rose above them. Foaming wall of water. So yeah, that's a metaphor, isn't it? So she's using metaphors and similes, and to a foaming wall of water rose above them. It's terrifying. The raft should have curved sinuously, sliding up the wave. Instead, it buckled across the middle, the front half snapping towards the back. So, really active verbs, like the beak of a bird closing. So the imagery, you can unpick those as much as you want, like the beak of a bird closing. When the beak of a bird closes, it doesn't really open again, does it? It spends most of its time closed after it's eaten something. So it's like the raft is going to eat them. Something struck her on the side of the head, a boot perhaps. Look at that lovely dash. And she was underwater. Later she learned that the raft had flipped and a man had been trapped underneath it. I imagine he died. So it was just like she'd been flung clear. And then you've got this lovely description of her coming to the surface, white and silver. The description of the water is very powerful as well. She gasped air and was sucked under. The water was tumbled and boiled, and Emma felt it. So really active verbs there to say how powerful it is. And then she speaks to herself, I refuse to die in such a stupid way. Bruised and scraped, tumbled and boiled. So yeah, they do the verbs in pairs as well. She does the verbs in pair, Margaret Atwood. She did The Handmaid's Tale. Anyway, so I don't know how long I've done that for, but I want you to to do those two for me and write them up. And when you've done it, I want you to send them to me, and we'll go through it. Um, let's just go on to the next one. You can have your own ideas, of course, how it begins, how it ends, what language is used, what tone it is. That one's sort of, it's full of suspense, isn't it, actually? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? So refer to both text 1 and text 2 to answer the following questions. Compare how the writers of text 1 and 2 convey ideas and experiences. Support your answer with examples from both texts. So, the writer of text 1 conveys ideas in a very factual, objective way, in an informal, chatty way. Find the quotes. The other one uses a much more magical, mystery, creative way, and she's writing a story about the incident. So one's a creative piece, and one is a blog piece for gap year people. So they're completely and utterly different, and so they convey their ideas and experiences in different ways. One uses bullet points, the other one doesn't. One's from the first person, ordinary, everyday teenager, as far as I can see. The other one is this person Emma is seen from a third person's perspective, so we can see what happens and how it affected her. It's a comment, isn't it, from the third person? Yeah. What else could you say? They both start with a bit of suspense, actually, don't they? They both do that. So that's a comparison. They both start with suspense. And they're both describing events that are extreme and out of the ordinary. And they're actually both talking about water events, aren't they? And they're both in foreign countries, actually. They seem to be tourists in foreign countries. The subject matter is the same, isn't it? Tourists in foreign countries doing foolish, extreme things. They're both girls as well. Yeah, so convey ideas and experience. So they're both showing extreme bravery and slight foolishness on the part of both of the characters that are being described, aren't they? The message. Bravery and foolishness and adventurousness. You can say what you want about it, it's up to you, but yeah. So you need to look at, one relies on sort of facts and descriptive language and paragraphing and bullet points and the first person informational tone, but it's also enthusiastic. The other one relies on imagery very heavily because she's creating layers and layers of meaning. The meaning in that one is that the nature in the form of birds and the actual, like a huge throat closing, is dangerous, deeply, deeply fatal for us human beings. The water can swallow you up, and it's used like, sort of the power of nature, basically, I would say. But basically, because she survived it, she thinks she's got this magic, shimmering aura. So look at how they both begin and end. One wants you to go and do it because she keeps telling you all about it. The other one, not so much. What else could we say? Convey ideas and experiences. If there's anything else we can say, I'm just going to have another look at it. This one uses flashbacks as well, doesn't it? And detail. And the paragraphs on detail, exactly what's happening. Her head rose up, she gasped and was sucked under. That's rule of three as well, there, isn't it? So lists of what's happening to her. They're both about young women, aren't they, in foreign countries? Oh yeah, he's reported what he said. They'd done the 9 times so far. And it was posted that they won't reach over to the public until they'd done one more test. So yeah, so she likes us that she's a risky girl already. She likes to do risks, and they wanted her there. There's no description of any people, is there? There's some beautiful thrilled noises. Oh yeah, and so you've got sense description as well, which is part of my recipe. Emotive language. So that one, dutifully thrilled, noise, and some genuine noises. Both of them use those noise description as well, don't they? And both of give you detailed description of the setting. They scramble on the ball and fancy it, don't they? Were among the first to arrive and had to wait for the others. It's like a floating car park. Getting the imagery there. Yeah, so one of my group cried she didn't want to do it. I toughened up and went for it. It was freezing cold. So this is from the point of view of a girl who's on this trip, isn't she? Um, and using really ordinary language. It felt weird to be in daylight again. There's no imagery here. It's not a creative piece at all. It's just basically almost like an advert piece, isn't it? We sat drinking on the edge of a 3 metre drop into water while Nixon flashed, picked up the zip line stuff. I was terrified to make us jump into what they did. Yeah, so a bit of suspense there. And lots of extreme language, the freezing water. I toughened up and went for it. Um, Ridiculously tired. They were weak and trying to push up over the brow of water I feared would finish me off. Feared, that's emotive language to get us hooked in, isn't it? Like everyone before me, I made it out. So it's a reassurance that everyone is okay. Yeah, so it's like a news piece, really, isn't it? One's a news piece and one's a creative piece. One's trying to, say that because she's survived that, she thinks she's surrounded in magic. And this one's just definitely an experience to remember at Blackwater rafting in New Zealand. So just sort of sharing her experience. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to ask you to do that.